never let somebody tell you you can't do something.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet.
You're listening to the Live to Create podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/live to create. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the official Live to Create podcast, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. I am your host, Shane Almgren, and I am joined today from West Palm Beach, Florida, by my good buddy, international performing magician, lecturer, and creator of illusions, Karl Hein, a.k.a. Karl Koppertop. Karl has appeared on the Pete Holmes Show, and his ideas have been featured on America's Got Talent and Penn and Teller's Fool Us. He has authored numerous instructional DVDs and done seminars for elite magic organizations, including the world-famous Magic Castle. Karl, once again, thank you for joining me. It is great to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Shane.
So you're off gallivanting and traveling around the world doing lectures and performances, correct?
That is correct.
Where have you been most recently?
Well, most recently I've done a couple things in the U.S., up in Buffalo, New York, and my last large tour was in Japan. So I did 2.5 weeks in Japan, and that was an amazing experience.
Quite a bit of stuff in other countries. Where else have you been?
All over Europe, a lot in Australia, New Zealand, Asia, and of course all over the United States.
Are there certain places overseas that have more of a magic community than others?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly different countries have different styles and have bigger communities. Spain, in particular, has a very large magic community, especially related around card magic. And in Japan also is a very good community. But the U.S., of course, probably has the most magicians and the most literature in regards to magic and history. But all different countries have their own take on it, as with any art form.
So these different countries that have different particular styles that they're into, are you able to go and cater to all of them and do something that they're all used to seeing, or do you go and feature something brand new that they're not used to seeing?
Most of the time when I'm lecturing or performing, I'm doing my own material. So in that regard, it's going to be new for just about anybody that watches it, because it's stuff that I've created versus stuff that has been out there and about. So in that regard, yes, it's all new to the people that are watching. But of course, some of my styles, similar to other people's styles, the magician styles that they've seen in the past. So there's going to be a level of familiarity, as well as some things that are going to be completely different. It all depends on where you're at in your magical career.
Are there any magicians out there whose name we might recognize that your style is similar to?
Not really. I mean, most of the average public is only going to be familiar with maybe a random magician or two that they've seen at a private party or corporate event, or the big names on television like David Blaine, David Copperfield, Chris Angel in the U.S., and the other big ones in different countries that if you live in those specific countries. And most of those don't do anything along the lines of what I do. What I focus on is more the close-up magic, similar to maybe what you'd see David Blaine do, but more of a different style and presentation, because it's more about the entertainment quality of it than being on TV and being a mysterious stranger.
So there are different types of magic. You talk about close-up. There's illusions. There's vanishing tanks and elephants and whatnot. Why don't you describe a little bit specifically how you do a performance, what close-up magic entails?
Well, I do lots of different types of events. So a lot of what I do is cocktail hour type of situations, where it might be at a wedding or a bar mitzvah or a corporate event, where I would walk around a party with more of a social environment where people are chatting and talking, and engage groups of 5-10 people at a time, and then perform for 5 to 10 minutes, where I'm doing all sorts of different types of magic with different types of objects and or mind reading, to basically give people a very magical experience, or experience of wonder that they can't explain it, and then they talk about once you leave the group. It's all magical, about creating that sense of wonder and curiosity, and asking more questions than having answers, which I think is something that's an important part of life in general, is always having that curiosity to try to evolve your knowledge of the world, basically.
Said mind reading a second ago. Do you want to try a mind reading experiment right now? Are you feeling lucky?
There's a lot to it, Shane.
All right. I am thinking of a random card in the deck.
It's 9 of diamonds, of course.
Ah! How do you do that?
Every time.
Every time. It's like 21 years of that. Unbelievable. You told me before that when some of the countries that you go to, you've been treated like a rock star on some of your trips around the world. Are there any particular incidents that stand out?
Well, when I say rock star, I mean, I don't think quite like exactly a rock star. But, you definitely get treated with a level of, when you're known within any industry, people within the industry are going to treat you in a way that you wouldn't get on a normal type of vacation or business trip necessarily,
No drug fueled orgies.
Not that I can talk about.
Ma'am, watch me make this disappear.
But it's nice to be able to have a small level of fame within a specific community where people do treat you in a respectful manner, and you still go out on the street every day and not be recognized. And it's kind of it's a nice thing to have. And it also, constantly pushes you to, produce more and to, better yourself as well, to kind of stay on top of your game.
How old were you when you first started doing magic?
I started when I was a kid, like 7 or 8 years old, I think, but really got seriously into it. And when I was around 12 or 13, when I started going to magic club meetings and magic conventions, which is, when you get a group of people around you that are like-minded and that are, your age and interest in doing the same type of things that you're doing, of course, it increases that interest a lot more.
Magic early on, is it like learning an instrument where you have a teacher or you take lessons, or how does that work when you're starting out?
Well, the path is different for everybody, just as it is in music. Some people learn completely on their own. Some people have a teacher, as you just mentioned. And there are certainly a lot of mentors in the magic world, and a lot of people have that experience. For me, I learned initially from many different sources, little bits and pieces from many different people that I had met. Local magicians, books and videos that I read and watched when I was a kid or a teenager, and then going to magic conventions and seeing different individual people speak and pick up different styles and pick up different effects that I wanted to learn. So for me, it was all from different sources, but certainly some people do have a mentor where, they kind of emulate that particular mentor style and go that route as well. So there's no one path.
All either a certain performance or a particular effect or illusion that you saw early on when you were mesmerized and were like, I've got to do that?
Not particularly. I mean, I always kind of enjoyed magic and I always kind of liked it. I never really thought to myself, I don't ever remember thinking to myself, I want to be a magician or I want to do that. I just enjoy doing it. It was that simple. I enjoyed learning. I enjoyed trying to figure the secrets out. I enjoyed performing and getting and having people experience those moments of wonder. And it was never something that I wanted to necessarily do as a career. It's something that kind of happened over time.
Ever paying a lot of attention early on to the bigger names like the David Copperfields or the guys who were on TV?
Not a lot. I never really watched a lot of television as a kid. I mean, I was familiar with David Copperfield. I think I saw one of his live shows. I'm sure I saw a couple of his television specials, but I was never allowed to watch a lot of television as a kid, so I never really had the experience of being influenced by the stage illusionists in the bigger shows like that. Later on, of course, I followed some things with like David Blaine, but that was more into my right after college, I think. But I've never been one much to watch the big names on television, religiously in any way. I try to follow and keep up a little bit of who they are and what they do, but it's not my main area of interest.
What is the correct terminology as far as magic, illusion, trick, effect? Are all of those synonyms, or do they mean something different?
Magic versus illusion versus trick, they all have slightly different connotations, I guess, but it all depends on what you kind of bring to it. In the end, it's all kind of illusions. Basically, what we as magicians do is we create the illusion of impossible things. So a magician might say, well, it's impossible to make someone float in midair. How do I create the illusion of doing that? And in trying to solve that problem, many different magicians or illusionists or conjurers, however you want to call it, come up with many different solutions to solving those problems, which is what I think is a very interesting thing about magic, and how many different solutions there are to a lot of the common illusions that you see. So yeah, I mean, in general, when you say a trick usually implies more of something of a puzzle, so to speak, where you might see a magician do a trick. It's like, oh, that was really cool. I have no idea how you did it. Whereas what magicians are really trying to go for, and giving you a moment of really true wonder or astonishment, is giving you a moment of feeling, even though your brain knows there's no way that this could be possible, you just can't fathom any possible explanation. And it's not even like it's a trick, it's just like it's real magic. And that's really what you're trying to go for as a magician. And so in that, there are subtle differences between different terms, but there's nothing that's really particular is that this is the definitive way of using it.
One of the things that always fascinated me about magic from a psychological standpoint is because it's a unique entertainment experience where the audience gets the most out of it when they genuinely do not understand what's happening. Like if you watch someone doing a world-class guitar solo, you realize that you can't do that, but you do understand what it is he's doing, and you see the skill. So you can go home and you could pick up a guitar and start very slowly picking out the notes one at a time, understanding that eventually it would take years to build up to that speed and dexterity. But with magic, we don't see any of the technique. All we get is the effect, or if we do see it, we don't realize it. So how does one walk away from a magic performance and go home and start practicing what they saw if we don't really know what we even saw?
Well, I think what's great about magic is it kind of inspires your imagination. And so if you have no knowledge of any kind of magical technique, and you see a magic performance, and you see this a lot with kids. When you see a kid watch a magic show and then they start trying to practice, making something disparate from their hand, it's really quite obvious when you watch them do it because they don't know what they're doing, but the inspiration is there, And with magic, you have to obviously learn the secrets, but there's also cases where people have created their own effects and illusions from scratch without having any influence from outside sources, which oftentimes can be the most creative. So, I mean, basically when you see a show, you're going to be inspired. And that inspiration gets you to the point where you have to know there's all different paths you take. Some people will track down other magicians to try to learn the secrets. Some will learn from books, go to the library. Nowadays, of course, the internet and YouTube, where a lot of magic secrets are on YouTube to be able to go and for people to be able to find. But you still have to put the time in, and that's the currency you deal with is time. You have to put the time in to practice, to learn, to research, to figure out the secrets if you really want to go down that rabbit hole.
In music, it's a great compliment if you write a song and then someone else covers it. I think it was one of the Beatles songs. I think it was Eleanor Rigby is like the number one most covered song of all time. There's over 130 different covers from everyone from Joan Baez to Aretha Franklin, and it's a way of paying respect to a great piece of music. And comedy, it's the exact opposite. You don't ever hear of someone doing cover jokes. You hear about comedians stealing jokes, and doing another comedian's joke is basically the lowest thing you can sink to in the world of comedy. Where on that spectrum does magic fall? Do magicians want other magicians performing their effects, or do they see it as stealing?
Well, it depends. It's very individualistic. I think I know several very well-respected magicians that, create their own effects and create their own routines and their own stage pieces. And they fight very much so to keep that only them performing those pieces because those are unique to them and their babies, And on the other side of that, there are many creators that create magic and then they give it to the community or they sell it to the community of magicians. And then, to them, it's a big honor to have, someone perform their effect on television because they themselves aren't a performer. They're more of a creator. Just to see the everyday magician performing their effects is also an honor. So I think there's a wide range of spectrum there and different opinions on that matter, depending upon who it is that you're talking to. I mean, in the end, though, I think everybody would agree that it's wrong for one performer to take someone else's original material and perform it as if it is their own without any kind of permission going about that,
Possible to trademark or copyright or patent performances or techniques?
It's a very difficult process, and it's not really something that you can do. There has been some, I guess, legal incidences that happened, most notably with Teller from Penn and Teller. And some of the pieces that they've done, they've copyrighted some of their illusions or their routines as plays, essentially. And as you can copyright a play, and you can copyright all the different actions of that play, you can copyright, therefore, how a specific routine is performed. But when it comes to actually the magic secrets and the effects and methods, it becomes very difficult and just not cost effective to try to patent it or try to enforce any kind of copyright on most of those types of things. There's exceptions, and those are pretty rare. In general, it's more of a gentleman's type of agreement where if you've created something and you publish it, and you get credit for it, and now it's kind of yours. But of course, there's also lots of contention in the magic community between different individuals who claim to have invented one thing, or there's all different sorts of little rivalries over material. But that's just going to happen no matter what,
I know that sleight of hand is a skill that has to be mastered. It's like playing the guitar or the piano. But does mentalism require a skill that has to be practiced, or is it more just memorizing data and routines? Like I just watched the invisible touch routine. Are you familiar with that one?
Mm-hmm.
And I watched a tutorial of it, and it's a great effect that almost anyone can do immediately once you know how it's done. Is all of mentalism like that, where it's just psychological sort of misdirection, or is there some skill set that one really needs to hone?
Well, I think that is in itself an illusion. Part of the big reason why magicians as well as mentalists don't teach their effects is because most of the effects that you will deal with are pretty simple in their concepts or in their nature. But that simple concept is very difficult to actually go out and perform. So even though, for example, if you watch a tutorial on how to learn this specific routine, it seems very simple. But for you to actually go out and perform that in a way that affects people and that has that effect of mystery and amazement on people is a lot more difficult than it initially seems. It's like the very simple magic trick that I think most people are familiar with. The common term for it is called the French drop, where you apparently have an object in your hand and you take it into your other hand, but you actually don't take it, and then it disappears from your hand. It's a very simple idea. You pretend to take something, but you don't. But to watch someone that's just starting off try to do that takes hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of practice to make that simple thing look very natural and actually fooling of someone. So yes, there is a level at which what we do is it's simple, but when you go beyond that, it's actually very, very, very complicated and very much in the details. On top of that, all different types of magic and different realms of the art form have different skill sets. If you're a stage illusionist, it's easy for a close-up magician to say, well, someone that's on stage is relying on this prop, this box that makes the actual assistant disappear or the person from the audience or whatever it is. It's not the actual magician doing any sort of skill. But there is still skill there. The skill is in how you choreograph, how you choose the music and the lighting, and how you present yourself on stage, how you talk to an audience, how you command their attention. All those things are skills that don't just come immediately to most people. They have to be developed. And that's the same in any kind of art form, especially with the magic. And in close-up magic, it's the skill of dealing with people to develop rapport. That's a really important skill. But then, again, with the magic side of it is being able to perform something so it's natural and it doesn't seem like something's going on when actually many things are going on beneath the surface. So there's a lot more than meets the eye.
That movie, The Prestige, with Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman, they were the two magicians who were rivals and were constantly trying to one-up the other. Mm-hmm. Is that a thing that actually happens in real life?
I feel like there's moments in history that has happened, but it's certainly not a very common thing, I don't believe.
Do magicians play pranks on each other?
Sure, absolutely. Within the magic community, you develop certain groups of friends going to conventions and maybe within your own city of people that you get together and meet with. And oftentimes groups of magicians can be quite the practical jokers. Some are very well known for that. Amazing Jonathan, for example, wrote a book about it, about some of his famous pranks. Some are much more so than others, but yeah, it's a lot of fun messing with your fellow magicians.
The Penn and Teller show Fool Us, was that show done just purely for entertainment because the producers thought it would get ratings, or was that a legit vehicle that Penn and Teller were using to find new acts or learn new tricks by actually getting fooled?
I believe it's a bit of both. I can't speak obviously authoritatively on that because I'm not one of the producers or Penn and Teller. But anything that's on television in general is going to be all about the ratings, and you have to have the ratings to be able to get the show on television, or at least to keep it on television once it's been on. From Penn and Teller's perspective, I think there's the hook of the Fool Us, which I think is kind of bittersweet. I know from some conversations I've heard about from them that they're not having the focus being about fooling them and about it being on the secret is not something I think that they would think is ideal, or most magicians in general. Most magicians don't think it's all about the secret. It's more about the effect you have on people and the presentation of how you perform it. But by having that hook and by having that easily defined thing for people to tune in and to watch to see if they can be fooled, it gives them the opportunity to have many great magicians that create original works of art come on their show and present their many different styles. So in that end, I think it is a great way for them to be able to show magic in many different forms. And a lot of performers that would not normally see on most other television shows. Most of these types of people wouldn't go on shows like America's Got Talent or have their own specials for a variety of reasons, but they fit really well into that specific format. And so I think it's been a really good thing for magic and having the ability to show many different types of magicians and styles of magic.
So the showcase aspect of it is cool, but the actual fooling part is more of a gimmick. And I think you've articulated before about why the whole fooling process is so tricky to define. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the fooling process, I mean, some people say, the whole thing is kind of fake. But no, from my experience with the show, as well as many friends of mine who have been on the show, it's definitely a very much a case of either they're fooled or they're not fooled. I've had friends that go on the show that have, on many instances, fooled Penn and Teller before, but have chosen to do material that they've already kind of revealed to Penn and Teller. And Penn has said that, we're familiar with your magic, you've fooled us many times before, but, we know that trick. So that they are definitely true to, you have to fool them to be able to get the Fool Us status, at least for the most part. But it's definitely something that is an interesting challenge as a magician going on the show, because you want to have your work be perceived in a very good light, but you also want to try to fool them to be able to get to essentially win the show, So it's different for everybody that goes on the show. I think it's different for Penn and Teller too, how they approach different acts. Some of them they're going to really like as far as performance pieces go, and want to support the artist, and others are not going to like as much. It's just kind of the nature of one's opinion, You've done some stuff on the Pete Holmes Show, and I think you had some ideas featured at least on America's Got Talent. Is that correct? How'd you end up on the Pete Holmes Show? The Pete Holmes Show came about. I was kind of I had a couple of videos that went viral in regards to magic, the experiences on Conan. So I was familiar with who he was, and a friend of mine, Justin Woolman, had done some stuff with Pete, I think through Pete's podcast. And I was at the Magic Castle, Woolman and a couple other friends had brought Pete Holmes in. And then maybe a month or so earlier, a couple weeks earlier, I had seen them and done some stuff at a magic convention for Justin and a couple other magicians, and had fooled them and impressed them. And so they'd asked me to come over and do some stuff to Pete. And at that point, I proceeded to then perform a bunch of my original material for that small group. And Pete, being a great reactor to magic, loved it and had a great time. I think saw all the other magicians reacting, and I just said, I think he wanted me on the show because of that reaction that he had, and that he saw other, not just people, but magicians having in general.
There was a TV show several years ago where a masked magician revealed how a bunch of really well-known illusions were done. And then at the end of the series, he took off his mask, and it turned out to be a magician named Val Valentino. And he spoke directly at the audience that he had put the show together to get a new generation of kids interested in magic. What was the fallout from that show as far as other magicians were concerned? Did they buy his explanation that this was a good way to drum up more interest? Or did they just see it as a guy who has given away all their secrets of the trade and ruining the experience for everyone?
I think, again, you have to look at magicians not as a unified group, but as many different types of opinions. I was never familiar with that, his coming out and announcing himself. I don't remember that, but I remember, when the show first aired, magicians pretty much immediately know who it was. And, there's a lot of magicians that were, of course, very, very upset by the show. And I think it ranged across the whole spectrum. In general, we as magicians, at least I speak for myself, I'm willing to teach anybody the secrets of magic effect, as long as I feel like they have the skills and the desire to go out and perform it themselves and to make other people have that amazing experience of astonishment. But just simply telling the secret doesn't do any justice to what I just did as a performance or to them and their understanding of magic. It doesn't do much. And I think the same is true with that show, is that, it was not geared towards teaching people magic. It was geared towards just exposing secrets, which I think, is just not something that's, for lack of a better way of saying, it's just not cool. There's no real reason behind it, besides trying to get ratings and being sensationalist. Yes, some of the possible effect would be that it inspires some people to get into magic that maybe wouldn't have without having watched that show and seeing the reactions that maybe the magician had and learning the secret. I think that's a side note. I don't think that's necessary. I highly, highly doubt that's the actual reason why the show was done. I'm pretty sure it was done because someone got paid money to do it and they thought that they could make money off the show.
One of the reasons I really wanted to have you on this show is because you're not just a performer, you're also a creator, and that's the whole theme of this show is creation. There are a lot of people who play instruments, but they don't write music. They don't compose. They just play stuff that other people have written, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You have world-class symphonies playing stuff that Beethoven wrote. But coming up with your own stuff, writing your own material, creating your own effects, that's a whole different animal. So at what point did you move from just being a performer into getting creative at this?
I think it starts at the very beginning, and people that have that creative aspect in magic kind of start off also at a very young age for the most part. It starts with, finding your own ways of performing other people's material. And just as you talked about with the symphony, the people that become famous are the most famous in those types of industries where they're not creating their own music, but they're playing other people's music, become famous or become well known in that and music because they play those pieces with their own sense of emotion, and what they bring to it is in its own way to a degree unique. And it's the same with magic. You can be a performer that performs other people's material, but in a very unique way that definitely puts your own stamp or your own style on your own presentation, your own jokes, your own creation of drama, whatever it is. You try to bring yourself to that. So there's that aspect of being creative in your performance of classic effects or other people's material. But then there's also the methods of how you actually create magic, and that also comes into play when you say, well, what is it that I want to do? It's not just I want to go perform this effect, but this is an effect that I want to try to do. But there's no real way that I know of to do that. There's nothing I've read about in the magic books that tell you how to achieve this effect. Or the ones that I have read just aren't quite to my liking or don't fit my needs for how I want to perform it. So now it's up to you to kind of create your own method. And so when you can combine that, where you create your own method for achieving a specific illusion, and then your own unique way of presenting it, I think that's definitely an evolution of the art form. And it gives you, and it truly makes you a magician, because a magician, to me, is someone that just performs, is someone that really creates magic,
The goal of magic is to fool whoever your audience is, but is there a sense when you're developing a new trick to throw in something additional into the mix to fool your fellow magicians as well? Like, how much is done for the sake of the audience and how much is done with your fellow magicians in mind?
Well, it depends on what your audience is. If you're a children's entertainer and you're trying to entertain a bunch of 6-year-olds and fool a bunch of 6-year-olds, you don't put as much thought into how that's going to fool adults or fool your fellow magicians. And different types of audiences think differently about what they're watching and about how they analyze it. Kids think differently at different age groups. Adults think differently. Different types of adults think differently. And of course, magicians themselves, because they have a certain amount of knowledge, also very much approach how they watch a magic show quite a bit differently. It's the same as if you are in the movie industry and you're watching a movie on the big screen, how special effects are done and how stories are written, and having all that knowledge affects the way you view a particular movie. And the same with magic. And so that process is going to be different for everybody. For me, I personally try to put as many layers in my creations as possible, because I really want everybody to have to walk away with a positive experience. And even if a fellow magician isn't fooled, I want them to appreciate that there is a level of thinking there, a level of skill that was there, a level of performance that was there, that impresses them and makes them say, wow, that was really amazing. I'm really glad I got to watch that. And of course, you also want to hope to fool them as well. And that comes down to using different techniques or unexpected techniques or techniques in different ways. And it's certainly possible to fool your fellow magicians, at least temporarily, to give them that moment of amazement and surprise that you don't feel very often anymore as a magician.
Are there any tricks or effects out there that you've seen that you don't know how they're done and it's bugging you to find out?
I just saw one recently, actually. I was at a magic convention in Buffalo, New York. It's a big gathering of some of the best close-up magicians in the world, and everybody gets to go on stage and perform, at least most people do. And there's a couple acts, one in particular of a very old effect where, someone picks a card and it rises out of the deck. But in this case, the way the gentleman did it, someone just named a freely named trading card, rises out of a deck of cards several times. And I think he fooled pretty much every magician there, some of the best close-up magicians in the world, So it definitely makes you go, wow, I have no idea how he does that. You want to know, but at the same time, you also kind of want to hold on to that mystery. So it's kind of a bittersweet thing. Sometimes you want to have those mysteries, you just don't want to know. And we certainly have those as magicians experiences where you get fooled for whatever reason, and you say, don't ever tell me the secret to that. Don't ever let me hold on to that moment for a while, It's a good moment to have. That's why we do what we do, to give people, the average person, those moments of complete wonder and astonishment that they can remember forever.
And you can still enjoy the experience as an audience member still.
Yeah, absolutely. Enjoyed it as an audience member. But in this case, it was particularly interesting. So I'd seen this step before the Olympics of Magic in Italy last summer. I had seen this gentleman perform a very similar version of the effect. So it was cool because I was one of the few people that had already seen it. So I was talking to a lot of people, say, hey, make sure you pay attention to this, watch this guy, And sure enough, even with them being able to expect it, it kind of builds that anticipation and makes it even more amazing when you have no idea how it works as a magician. You're like, wow, that's amazing. I had absolutely no idea how that could possibly happen. And it just gives you that sense of wonder. It's a really great feeling to have.
So in the magic community, could you shoot him an email or just call him up and be like, hey, I'm a magician too. Here's my secret handshake and card. Tell me how you did it.
No, it doesn't really work like that, no. I mean, some people are very sharing of the creations and the secrets. Others, not so much. In this case, I have a feeling that he is looking to compete at some of the magic competitions down the road, as he already has at some. And so it's in his best interest to keep that a secret, so not as many people know it, because word spreads pretty much like wildfire when it comes to secrets of magic, of new effects. And so, if you can keep something a secret longer, the better off you are in that type of situation.
I know probably every single time you've ever done a trick ever, somebody goes, how'd you do that? What is the protocol for when you can share how you did something? I mean, there's some people who probably genuinely want to learn how to do some tricks. I mean, is it like a secret society? Is it a fraternity? Do you have to get a card? Like, what gives you access to being taught how something's done?
That's really on a completely individual basis. But speaking for the majority of people, I would say that it comes down to if someone comes up to you as a magician and you perform something and then they express that they have an interest in magic, and by the way they speak and the way they talk, you know that they have read, they have studied, they have researched certain things, and especially if they themselves perform a few effects. If they can perform a few things and they perform it relatively well, then you have more confidence in saying, well, if I teach you this, they're very likely to learn it and actually go out and perform it, versus just acquiring a secret, So that's really what it comes down to is if they have the abilities and the skills to go out and do it, you're more likely to reveal your secret. It's not always the case. Sometimes you might still say no, or this is a product I have for sale. You might have to buy it, or maybe simply that you just don't want to release that to the magic community or to this particular person. Some people keep it very tight within a very small group. They have a group of friends that they share their effects and routines with, and they kind of jam with each other on ways that make their individual routines better. But outside that small community, they don't really share with anybody else. There's all different approaches that people will take with what the criteria is to decide if they're going to teach someone an effect or not. But in general, there has to be a really valid interest beyond just saying, how did you do that?
So if somebody's going, for example, to purchase an instructional DVD, you can be fairly confident that they're not just trying to get a secret. What is, actually first, how many DVDs do you have in your series now?
Well, they kind of come and go, but I have around a dozen or 14, 15, somewhere in that range.
When you get one of these, is each one just dedicated to a single technique or a single effect, or do you get a bunch of tricks with the DVD? How does that work?
They're all different, just like with books, you can get books with many chapters with many different effects or different stories, and other ones are just one. And so with mine, I have some projects that are just go over a specific routine of mine, or other projects that will go over many different ideas. And they're all kind of different, and their approach as to what they all have a specific purpose, but they're all very different in how I've approached that.
Are there any props, like a deck of cards or something, that you never leave home without?
I usually have a deck of cards on me. I usually have one or two other effects with me, but a deck of cards is probably the main thing that I just enjoy carrying around with me, to always have something to play with and to perform with. So that's for me. But other people have different, props that they might use on a regular basis. But definitely a deck of cards is probably my preferred go-to. Outside
of the creative process, are there techniques that you work on a fairly regular basis to keep your chops up? I still play my scales and chords and arpeggios every day on the piano.
Of course. Not as much as I used to. There certainly are magicians that practice constantly and all the time, especially when it comes to technique. But I think after a while as a performer, the techniques you really need the most or use the most aren't ones that you can practice as much. It's more you have to be in front of an audience, whether it's on stage or walking around at an event or groups of people. So oftentimes, I might go out to town and just perform for some fun to practice some new routines or material. Of course, if something is brand new, then yes, I have to practice the technique at home or with fellow magicians to practice and to get better at my technique. And there are certain techniques that you do have to kind of keep your chops up on, but it kind of, for me personally, it kind of comes in waves where I'll go through periods of a lot of practice and then some would not a lot at all. It just kind of comes and goes for me.
When you come up with something that you think is worthy of getting its own instructional DVD, from conceptualizing that to actually filming it, how long does it take you to work up that routine?
Well, that's different for every routine. Some have happened from beginning to finish in the period of a month or two, and but most of them have taken many, many, many years to develop. It really just depends. For me, my process for creating effects has mostly been improvements on other people's ideas. So I'll start off with an effect or an idea, and I'll make slow changes to it over time. In the course of those slow changes, they have evolved in something that is completely different. And if you saw the original thing, you might say, oh, you notice that it's a similar type of thing. But if you really look at it, sometimes the effect it has on people can be very, very different. And there definitely has to be significant changes to be able to say, oh, this is now your own creation, or significant enough definitely to say that it's not yours or your ideas are valid to publish those ideas. And you just have to kind of analyze each of those on an individual basis. But from start to finish, I've had projects that from the time I started working on the idea, probably 10, 15 years, and other ones, like I said, a couple months. So there's a pretty broad range there of from beginning to completion to actually putting a product out. But in reality, a lot of some of the products I've put out have been put out for a variety of reasons, but some of them, I still don't feel like I'm finished with, and will constantly still change. I think an artist's work is never finished, as the old saying goes, and I think it's very true, is you always keep coming back to things and reanalyzing them and improving them.
When you're creating a new effect, how much of it is putting together old elements and maybe a combination that's not been done before, and how much is actually coming up with brand new techniques? And I'll frame this with another music analogy. Every time somebody writes a new song, they're putting a new melody together or rearranging chords in a different way, but no one is inventing new chords. All the chords that exist have been discovered. As far as magic techniques, are there still techniques to be discovered and invented, or are you guys just using all the known techniques and combinations that haven't been done before?
Well, I can't speak for music, but I mean, there was a time, of course, when there were new chords still being invented. And I guess maybe that's the case, that there's still new techniques being created in magic as well. A lot of those techniques, if you study them history, you know, have been around before, at least to some degree. But there are certainly, as the performance of magic changes, the techniques also have to change. And so as you change from instrument to instrument, those techniques have to change as well. So you might have, you know, similar type of notes or chords from a piano to a guitar, but the way you play those and the way you do them, of course, very different. And so as magic changes to different mediums, so in today's day of age, you know, there's magic on television, which requires different techniques and different methods than magic on a stage. Magic done for short little YouTube clips have different techniques and different methods that they're going to use. Audiences of today, their attention spans are not the same as they were 20, 30 years ago. And so similarly, you have to use different techniques and different presentational styles to be able to capture audience's attention. And just in the styles of magic too, it used to be 30 years ago that the standard way of performing close-up magic is you'd sit at a table, people would surround you at a table, and you perform on a little mat on the table. Nowadays, most of the places I perform, I'm walking around and strolling around groups of people that are all standing without necessarily having a table. So I have to use different techniques than someone that's sitting down at a table would use, that a lot of the literature was using. So earlier on in my career, I invented one or two things that took old ideas and brought them into this new environment, and doing so created new techniques that then many people have used and then built upon. There have been another improved versions of my techniques, and I've improved upon those versions. And so, yeah, techniques are still being invented and created in all different realms of magic, but there's also still very similarities to the past. You have to be respectful of that as well.
A particular trick or technique that you came up with that you're the most proud of?
Not really. I mean, there's some that I'm more well known for, I guess, but there's nothing that I'm necessarily the most proud of. It's just, I don't like it. I take pride in my work, I guess, but at the same time, I'm not overly confident, proud of it. It's, I just do what I do to make people happy and to spread the magic. It's not something that it's about pride for me, really.
I've asked all my songwriter and music producer guests which songs they've heard that they wish they would have written. Are there any effects or techniques that you've seen and you go, man, I wish I would have come up with that?
I'm sure there's certainly ideas that come out here and there, especially, particularly that happens most often with ones that are simple. When someone has a very simple idea that is just right there, and when you see it, you're like, oh my gosh, I could have thought of that. I should have thought of that, but I didn't think of that. Those are always, the most frustrating, especially when they can fit right into what you do or into the audiences you perform for. So that absolutely does happen. Most of what I try to create, with a few exceptions, are more complicated. They're more routines that are more involved and that have multiple layers to them. So there's a lot more work that goes into that sort of thing versus sometimes just that little tiny spark of creative genius. For example, I have one effect that oftentimes magicians will say, I wish I had thought of that. And it's a very simple thing where you just ask someone to give you $5, and they give you a $5 bill appears at your fingertips. And just using a very old technique of producing a playing card to produce a $5 bill, but you're just changing the medium and giving it context. And now all of a sudden, this is something that anybody can do at most any time within the context of what people do all the time of giving you a high five or giving you $5. And that's something that's just so simple, but no one thought about it, And so that certainly happens in other situations too for me, where I see something and go, "Wow, I wish I had thought of that,"
Is there anyone in your field whose brain you would love to pick that you haven't had the opportunity to yet?
There's certainly a few people that I really respect, that I really haven't gotten to spend a lot of time with. There's a well-known magician in Spain named Juan Tamariz, who I've met a few times and never really spent meaningful time with. He's a very great thinker and is considered to be one of the best magicians alive. There's a famous magician in England named Darren Brown. Him and his team, I think I really respect their work, the work that they put out, and it would be great to pick his brain to understand some of his process. And there's certainly, quite a few other people too. But I've been fortunate to meet and become friends with many of my teachers and heroes in magic over the years of performing as well as lecturing and sharing my ideas with other people to become friends with some of my heroes, which is a really cool thing to be able to do. And I think down the road the same thing will happen to people that have learned from me and that I've inspired too. It's already happened to a degree, and that's a cool thing when you know that you've inspired someone and then you can become friends with them.
Somebody came to you and said, Karl, I want to be a professional magician. I'm just starting out. What advice would you give them?
Well, I think advice is you have to be very careful with giving out advice, because any advice that you have is very particular to you, to your own experiences. And so I try to be hesitant about giving out advice unless I really have gotten to know the person and really get to understand what their goals are, what their skills are, where they're coming from, where they want to go. And if that experience overlaps to my experience, then I can, of course, certainly say, well, this is how it applies to me, and I can certainly help them out. It's not anytime you work for yourself in any sort of do-it-yourself business and or art form, there's a lot of personality traits that to be successful you have to have, or you need to find ways around if you're going to be successful and have a good career. When it just comes to being an entrepreneur and owning your own business, you have to know how to run a business and be disciplined to do that. And that's not for everybody, And just because you love an art form doesn't mean that you can make a living as an artist or as a musician, even though you're maybe the most talented at it. It's not just your talent that's necessary. It's a combination of things. Or if you have that talent, finding the right people that can then promote you and support you. There's multiple paths. For me, I take the path of kind of being that balance of trying to do it all, where I create my own, but I also am my own promoter. But I don't promote myself a ton, just enough to the amount that I want to do. And so to answer your question, my advice would be different for everybody. There's no specific advice I'd give. It really is an individual basis, I believe.
What is the most challenging aspect of being a self-employed, business-owning, performing magician?
I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. I think that what is the most challenging thing changes throughout different phases of your life. So I don't think there's any. The
business side, or is it more on the performance side?
Well, again, that goes in phases. In the beginning, when you're not as good of a performer, the challenge is to become a really good performer by performing a lot, so that you're giving people. To me, the way I always, one advice I give to magicians, not advice, but one thing that I say I think is really necessary is that as a performer, you have to give people an experience that they feel like they have to share with people they know. You have to give them an experience that has affected them in such a way that they need to validate that through their friends, their family, their coworkers, their bosses, whatever that is, their clients. And if you give people that experience and they feel like they have to share, you're going to get work, as long as the people that you're in front of are people that can afford to hire you and afford to spend money on you, And that's the same, I think, in any field. I think Steve Martin said something similar in an interview I heard with him where he said, be so good they can't ignore you. And that's what it comes down to is if you are performing in your level of, if you reach that challenge of becoming so good at your craft, whether it be music or art or magic in my case, that people can't ignore what you do, even people that are skeptical or that don't like magic or have had bad experiences with a magician in the past or don't like that feeling of not knowing. If you reach that point where they can't say anything, oh my gosh, I really had a great experience. I don't like magic, but I love you. Or whatever it is, and they feel like they feel like they have to take what they've just experienced and share that with someone else. I think you've succeeded. That just takes a process to be able to get that good all the time, not just once, one out of 10 times, but every time have that experience. Because some audiences are very easy to entertain and some are not. But as your career progresses, absolutely, it becomes more about the business side if you want to be successful at it, and that's just. There's multiple elements of that. It's how you make the money, but also what you do with it, how you invest it, how you save it, how responsible you are with it, how you market yourself, how you advertise yourself, how you carry yourself and brand your image. As with any business, there's all these different aspects of business that you have to be aware of, or at least have someone else be aware of and in charge of for you, which opens up a whole other can of worms of having agencies and representation. And it's very difficult to find people that have your best interest in mind if that's the case. I've never really gone that route to a degree, but I have friends that have, and so, and that can be a really great thing or a really bad thing for somebody. So there's really all different approaches to it. And those challenges are going to be changing throughout your career. It's also another challenge that I have many friends have had where they reach success. Being very successful is a challenge in and of itself. And how do you keep that success going, or how do you come to grips with no longer being that success anymore? If you have a well-deserved television show or a huge, run on a play or in a theater run where you're performing for, sold-out crowds and established venues, and where do you go from there? Do you continue or doing the same thing, and will the next thing you do be good enough? Those challenges, there's always challenges throughout your career, and that's the beauty of life, is you're always growing, you're always having those challenges and how you face them,
So do you have a mapped out career trajectory, or are you just along for the ride?
I try to be, I'm more of the mindset of going along for the ride. I don't really have a mapped out trajectory. And that I feel like to a degree I've already achieved what I would like to have achieved, and that's I'm able to make a great living performing, doing what I love to do, meeting new people, and having the effect that magic has on people. I've never had the dream of being what most people look at as the success of being on television or being in Vegas or having the sold out shows. It's just never been what I have aspired to be. It's not the style of magic that I look to do. And so for me, the success comes in just being content and happy with where I'm at in life. And I think we talked about this before about an interview I think it was with Tony Hale. Was it Nathan Hale? Tony Hale from the Arrested Development.
Buster Bluth.
Yeah, and as an actor or as any kind of performing artist, you get the question a lot of, what's next? What's next in your career? What's the next thing that you're going to do to be a success? Because, as an artist, it's like people don't ever really look at you as a success unless you are at this extreme pinnacle of being, David Copperfield or Brad Pitt in the acting world, But, his point was, you don't go to your dentist or your doctor and ask them what's next in your career. Because there are many careers out there where, you go to school, you get your degree, and now you've achieved, and the next 30 years of your life is just practicing your career. And to me, that's where I feel I'm at, is I've learned, I've practiced. There's many different places and directions I'm going to go with what I'm doing. But to me, I have my career and I have what I'm doing, and I feel like I'm already there and I've been there. It's just a matter of enjoying the ride now, and going with that flow.
Well, Karl, that was very beautiful and eloquently put, and I think we could probably all learn something from that. And on that note, that brings us to the last segment of this interview. So without further ado, here are 14 questions for you. Number 1, if your job only paid the bills and not a penny more, would you still continue to do it?
I think so. I mean, I can't see myself doing much of anything else, and I feel like if it only paid the bills, I would be fine with just paying the bills. I mean, it's I don't necessarily do what I do for the money, but of course, if anything I decide I want to do, I want to be successful. I want to feel like I am succeeding, especially in the monetary aspect of it, just because it's part of the game of life. That's not the only game of life. Money is only a portion of what life's about. And to me, the value of money is what it allows you to do, and the freedom it allows you to have. But if you're not careful, it can also enslave you. So to me, I think I would be doing it regardless, one way or the other. I think any artist would say the same if they really love what they do.
What talent or skill do you not have that you wish you did?
Oh, I don't know. I think there's many talents and skills that I wish I had. And I've thought about this recently and about, trying to want to pick up other hobbies. And I feel like talents that really have an effect on people, I think to me are the ones that are the most important, So, magic certainly has an effect on people. Music, of course, has a really great effect on people. Comedy has a great effect on people. So I think things along those lines of, I wish I was maybe a better musician. or a musician. I'm not a musician at all. I like to learn how to play the piano a little bit better and things along those lines. And in regards to my own particular field, I think, being more naturally talented at comedy would, I think, help me in my the magic side of things. And I think that's something that also is just, being something that can make people laugh is always a great thing. I think there's many skills to have, but to me, it's about, like I said, affecting people in a positive way.
Fill in the blank. I'm a success if I
feel like I'm a success if I keep doing what I'm doing. As we talked earlier, I feel like as long as I am having a positive impact on people's lives and on my own life, I'm a success.
How about I'm a failure if I
think you're a failure, or I'm a failure if I stop failing. I think, it's true. The secret to success is failure. And if you start looking at failure as failure, then you have truly failed, But if you look at your mistakes and your failings as positives and as a means to a greater end, then that is, one definition of success. And I think that's an important way to look at life, and always try to be more optimistic.
What is the best piece of advice that you followed to get where you are today?
I mean, there's been many different things along my path or along my career, or specific moments that kind of stand out, but nothing in particular that I can really say has really had a profound influence on my overall take. I've always been a big fan of balance in my life, and I guess that comes from maybe studying the Renaissance and Leonardo da Vinci. It wasn't really advice, but it was kind of an example of looking at people that were kind of had a broad range of skills and talents. And I've always tried to, or my goal has always been in magic to kind of have that broad base and to be able to do many different types of skills and talents. And I think that's done well for me.
What's a piece of well-intentioned advice you're glad you ignored to get where you are?
Well, I think early on, when you own your own business, it wasn't something that I would say that I ignored, but I quickly learned it wasn't for me. Is that, when you have your own business as an artist, any business in general, there's a never-ending supply of advice of what you should do to make your business better. And, I think for my business, it came down to letting go of some of those things that I felt like I should be doing all the time, based upon these models of how other people have run their business, and finding what works best for me. To have faith in my own model, my own process for running my business and for developing my art. And I think that has been something that was not initially easy to advice to, kind of ignore or to disregard. But I think it's done well for my happiness and for my overall business.
Great. Do you like best about yourself?
I think I'm pretty well balanced.
What character trait do you like least about yourself?
Well, I don't know. I feel like there are certainly times where I procrastinate and I am not as efficient in achieving some of the goals that I'd like to achieve.
I'm unfamiliar with this procrastination of which you speak.
I'm sure you are, Shane. I'm sure you are.
Fill in the blank, Karl. I believe every child should have the opportunity to...
I feel like every child should have the opportunity to grow old but not grow up, to enjoy life as long as you can with that sense of childlike curiosity and wonder.
You could suggest one piece of self-improvement that everyone on earth would adopt. What would it be?
I think more empathy. If we had more empathy towards other people, there'd be a lot less fighting, a lot less war, a lot less politics. So you can see things from different people's perspectives and really understand where they're coming from, and realize that if you had their same experiences, you might feel the same way.
If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Having recently watched Heroes, I would have to say a master of time and space like a hero would be a pretty cool power to have.
If you could have dinner with anyone alive or dead, who would it be?
I think going back into history, I feel like Tesla is certainly a very interesting individual that was a genius and ahead of his time. Yeah, Da Vinci too.
An hospitable nearby planet has been discovered and you've been recruited to help colonize it. You may take any 3 items with you that you wish.
Of course, for me, a deck of cards is an important thing to have on me at most times. Recently, I've been into working on the Rubik's Cube and Rubik's Cube magic, so I think a Rubik's Cube is something else. And the last thing, I don't know, I think that comes to my mind right now
Person to colonize a new planet with two things.
Perfect.
All right, last one. You've just won a Lifetime Achievement Award, and we want your acceptance speech. There won't be any music to cue you or rush you off the stage, so you can get to all of the thank yous that you need. And if there's any personal cause that you want to champion, this is your soapbox, so let her rip.
Well, there are many people to thank, of course, starting with my family and my mother specifically, who, always encouraged the magic bug in me, and used to bring me to magic meetings as a kid when I couldn't go because I was too young to go by myself. And along the path have been many magicians that I have learned from and have inspired me without knowing it, as well as have taken the time to teach me. I wouldn't be, of course, where I'm at today without all of them. And if I had, within magic, my dream, I guess, would be to let more people in the world see the type of magical performances that I've seen, because I've seen so many different types of performances, from very good to very bad. And I know what magic can be, and at its highest art form, it can be an amazing thing that really inspires wonder, inspires curiosity. People can move you emotionally and can really affect you to do good for the world and to see things from different perspectives, which I think aligns with what we talked about earlier about, I wish more people could see things from different perspectives, and only in doing so can you really find the truth. One of my favorite quotes has always been a Homer Simpson quote, which is, "Facts are meaningless. They can be used to prove anything." And I think that's really true, and it's kind of one of the bases of magic and deception is that, it's not about having facts, it's about having all the facts. And you can have half or three quarters of the facts but come to a very different conclusion based upon how you approach those facts and about what you want to bring to them. And without having all the information, it's really hard to really get at the truth of the matter. And I think magic can teach a lot of people about that sort of thing, and that magic will give you a different perspective if you really take the time to look at it and analyze it, because you're shown these things of complete moments of impossibility, which are real and that are in essence an illusion or a trick, but your mind can't find any possible way around believing what you've just seen, this impossible thing, something floated or disappeared, or your mind has just read in an impossible way. And that should inspire you to try to search for how different ways of approaching the world and seeing the world, as opposed to just from one perspective. And I think if more people saw the level of performances I've seen and that I hope to perform in my performance career, that I think more people would have those types of experiences, and I think the world would be a better place, and I think the art of magic would be as well.
Karl, that is very eloquent and very insightful.
I'm glad you think so, Shane.
Who else's approval do you need?
Right now, only yours.
If people want to book you, where should they go do that?
Well, my website is karlkoppertop.com. It's Karl with a K, and Koppertop, KOPPERTOP.com. For any magicians out there listening to this or aspiring magicians, my real name, of course, is Karl Hein, KarlHein, which is my website for magicians, where I sell a lot of the instructional DVDs of my creations that we mentioned earlier. And those are more for magicians that are already magicians and that aren't necessarily newbies, but feel free to email me or contact me through either of those websites, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions about the art of magic or point you in the direction if you have an interest in going those routes.
Hot seat, Karl. Thank you very much for joining me.
It's been my pleasure. It's been great talking to you as always, Shane.
Good talking to you too, buddy. Talk soon. Once again, that was international performing magician, lecturer, and creator of illusions, Karl Hein, a.k.a. Karl Koppertop. For booking information, please visit www.karlhein.com. And if you're a magician wanting to learn some of his original performances and techniques, please visit www.karlkoppertop.com. Today, you are listening to the Live to Create podcast, and this is Shane Almgren reminding you to dream big, be